The operations room smelled like burnt coffee and cold metal. Screens flickered blue against the concrete walls. Boots scraped across the floor as officers shifted in their seats. I need a Tier 1 sniper. Now. The SEAL colonel's voice cut through the room. I stood up. Before I could speak, my mother laughed softly from the front row. Not loud, not cruel, just certain. "Sit down," she said without looking at me. "You're not qualified." A few officers lowered their eyes. No one defended me. No one reacted. I felt the weight of their silence more than her words. Have you ever been dismissed so casually that it almost felt rehearsed? The colonel turned toward me anyway. "Call sign?" My voice stayed steady. Phantom-11. That was the moment the room changed. I didn't earn the name Phantom-11 because I liked being mysterious. I earned it because disappearing was the only way to survive in a system where I was constantly being watched, measured, and quietly written off. My mother likes to tell people she raised me tough. She'll say it like a compliment, like she carved me out of stone and sent me into the world polished and ready. The truth is simpler. I learned to be quiet because noise wasn't safe in our house. She was already a general by the time I was old enough to understand ranks. At family events, people stood when she entered a room. At restaurants, servers straightened their backs the second they recognized her. Even at my school, teachers spoke to her in that careful tone people use when they're talking to authority. They didn't ask what I wanted to be when I grew up. They asked what branch I'd join, like it was a family tradition, not a choice. When I told her I wanted to enlist, she didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She just asked, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm good at it." She looked me up and down like I was a proposal she didn't plan to approve. "You're too small," she said. "Too soft. You'll quit." I remember the way the kitchen light reflected off the granite counter, the sound of the fridge humming behind her, the calm confidence in her voice, like she was reading a weather report. I didn't argue. That was the first rule I learned with her. If you try to convince her, you lose twice. Once because she'll say no, and again because she'll remember you tried. So I nodded and went back to my room. I trained anyway. Every morning before school, I ran in the dark neighborhood streets with a cheap watch and a borrowed weight vest. My breath would come out in little white clouds. I'd come home, shower fast, and eat oatmeal standing up because sitting felt like wasting time. At night, I'd do pull-ups on the doorframe bar until my arms shook. I didn't post it anywhere. I didn't talk about it. I just kept going. When I finally got in, she acted like she wasn't surprised, like she'd expected it all along. At graduation, she shook my hand like I was a junior officer she didn't know personally. "Don't embarrass me," she said. That line stayed with me for years, not because it hurt in a dramatic way. It was worse than that. It became a rule in my head. Don't embarrass her. Don't be seen failing. Don't ask for help. Don't let anyone catch you needing anything. And the thing is, that rule worked. I advanced fast because I didn't complain. I didn't ask for favors. I didn't make noise. I showed up early, stayed late, did the boring parts without being told, and left before anyone could notice I was still there. People think confidence is loud. In my world, confidence is the person who says the least and hits the target anyway. Even my instructors noticed. One of them pulled me aside after a long day at the range. His voice was low, like he didn't want the others to hear. "You don't flinch," he said. "Not even when you're tired." I shrugged like it didn't matter, but inside I felt something settle. Proof. Quiet proof. I didn't call my mother to share it. I didn't need her to approve it. I had already learned the cost of wanting that. Years later, when the call sign Phantom-11 was assigned to me, it wasn't about stealth. It was about how I moved through rooms without being acknowledged until the job was done. Like a ghost. Like someone they never saw coming. And that day in the operations room, when my mother laughed and told me to sit down, it wasn't new. It was familiar. It was the same muscle memory. But the colonel didn't laugh with her. He didn't even glance at her. He looked at me like my name meant something. And for the first time in my life, I watched my mother realize she wasn't the highest authority in the room anymore. How many years had she spent assuming I would always be beneath her? The room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp. It simply shifted. The colonel didn't repeat my call sign. He didn't question it. He just gave a short nod, the kind reserved for people whose records speak louder than introductions. Phantom-11, he said calmly. You're up. That was it. No explanation. No justification. Just acknowledgement. I could feel eyes moving between me and my mother. Not openly. Military rooms are trained to hide reaction. But tension has weight. It presses against your ribs. My mother straightened in her seat. Her posture didn't crack. Her expression didn't change. But her hands tightened slightly on the table. I noticed because I've always noticed small things. That's how you survive in my line of work. The early warning signs had always been there. She never asked about my deployments. She asked about my evaluations. She never said, "Are you safe?" She said, "Did you perform?" Even when I made marks most officers chase for decades, her response was measured, controlled. "Good," she would say. Maintain consistency. Maintain consistency. Like I was a stock portfolio. Like excellence was the minimum. Looking back, I wonder when I stopped trying to impress her and started trying to outgrow her expectations. Was it after my first classified op? After the commendation she never mentioned? Or had it happened quietly years before? In the operations room, the mission details rolled across the main screen. Terrain maps, wind patterns, elevation markers. My pulse slowed the way it always does before something precise. The colonel outlined the parameters. High risk, limited window, clean execution. I didn't need theatrics. I didn't need applause. I just needed coordinates. My mother cleared her throat. "Colonel," she said evenly, "with respect, there are more senior assets available." More senior. That word hung in the air. The colonel didn't turn toward her immediately. He finished reviewing the map first. Only then did he glance in her direction. "I asked for Tier 1, he replied. "I got Tier 1. Silence. Have you ever felt someone's authority slip just slightly, like a crack forming in glass? My mother had built her career on control, on precision, on being the most composed person in any room. But she hadn't accounted for one thing. I had built mine quietly, away from her shadow. And she hadn't been watching. As the briefing ended, officers began filing out. Conversations stayed low, professional, but glances lingered. One captain paused beside me. "Didn't know that was you," he said carefully. I gave a small nod. Most people don't. That was the point. When I stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and dust. My boots echoed against the polished floor. Behind me, I heard her voice. "Walk with me." Not please. Not, "Can we talk?" Just an instruction. I matched her pace without speaking. Years of practice. "You should have informed me," she said quietly once we were alone. "About your classification level." I looked straight ahead. It wasn't required. Her jaw tightened. She wasn't angry. She was recalculating. "You let me assume," she said. Assume. That word almost made me smile. How many assumptions had she made about me over the years? Too emotional. Too small. Too average. Too... hers. "I didn't correct you," I said calmly. That was the first honest sentence I had ever given her without cushioning it. We reached the end of the corridor where sunlight spilled through a narrow window. Dust floated in the beam like suspended time. She turned to face me fully then. "Don't mistake operational skill for leadership," she said. "Rank still matters." I met her eyes. I know. What I didn't say was this. Fear also matters. And respect. And reputation. And in that room, when I said Phantom-11, the colonel hadn't hesitated. She had. That was the difference. As she walked away, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not revenge, clarity. The pattern wasn't random. It wasn't personality. It was hierarchy. She needed me beneath her. And for the first time, I wasn't. How long had she relied on me staying quiet to protect her version of the story? The mission prep was fast. No dramatic speeches, no motivational noise. Just logistics, weather reports, exit routes, backup contingencies. I focused on the numbers: wind drift, elevation drop, distance markers. My mind moves best in silence, but something felt different this time. Not about the mission, about the room. Word had traveled quickly. By the time I entered the equipment bay, conversations dipped slightly. Not disrespectful, just aware. Have you ever felt the shift when people realize you're not who they thought you were? A lieutenant I barely knew approached me carefully. "Phantom-11," he said, testing the name like it was fragile. "Didn't know you were the one from Kandahar?" I adjusted my scope without looking up. Most didn't. He hesitated. "Your mother—" I cut him off gently. "Focus on the mission." That was the rule. Emotion complicates precision. Still, the pattern was clear now. Every time someone looked at me, there was recalibration. Not curiosity. Calculation. Because my record had existed for years. They just hadn't connected it to her daughter. Back in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of my mother speaking quietly with the colonel. Her posture was firm, controlled. But her head tilted slightly, the way it does when she's trying to regain narrative ground. She didn't look at me when I passed. That silence was louder than any reprimand. Growing up, she corrected me in public. "Stand straighter. Speak clearly. Don't interrupt." Now, in front of her officers, she had misjudged me. Publicly. The difference was this. I hadn't corrected her. I had simply stated my call sign. Have you ever realized that sometimes the strongest move is letting someone reveal their own blind spot? By evening, deployment orders were confirmed. As I secured my rifle, I felt something settle deeper than adrenaline. It wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about something else. For years, I had trained under the pressure of not embarrassing her. Now, I was operating without that weight. And that changes how steady your hands feel. As I stepped toward the transport vehicle, she finally spoke. "One mistake," she said quietly, not looking at me. "And they'll question the decision." "Not your mistake. Just mistake." I nodded. "I don't make many," I replied. For a second, her expression shifted. Not anger, recognition, because the truth had surfaced in the most inconvenient way. The asset the colonel trusted most was the daughter she never fully saw, and we both understood something now. After this mission, the hierarchy between us would never feel the same again. The rotor blades thundered above us as we lifted off. Inside the transport, no one talked. Headsets on, eyes forward. The cabin smelled like oil, metal, and recycled air. My gloved hands rested on my rifle, steady, calm. It's strange how quiet the mind gets before something decisive. For years, I had trained with one unspoken objective: don't fail where she can see it. Now, sitting across from men who knew my record but not my history, I felt something shift. This mission wasn't about her anymore. It was about the shot. Have you ever realized how much energy you spend trying to earn approval that was never designed for you? The target zone appeared on the tablet mounted near my seat. Mountain terrain, narrow ridge, hostile movement confirmed. We had a window measured in minutes, not hours. The colonel's voice came through my headset. "Phantom-11, you'll have primary." Primary. No hesitation. No debate. I closed my eyes briefly and let the memory settle of the operations room. Her laugh, the soft dismissal, the way she told me to sit down without even turning her head. I opened my eyes again. Emotion doesn't belong on the trigger. We landed hard but controlled. Boots hit dirt. The air outside was thin. cold, sharp. Dust moved in small spirals around us. I moved to elevation without being told. Rangefinder. Adjust. Breathe. My body knows this rhythm better than any childhood memory. Wind speed slightly higher than forecast. Correction made. Through the scope, the world narrows. Noise disappears. History disappears. There is only geometry. The shot isn't dramatic. It's clinical. Squeeze. Silence. Confirmation comes through seconds later. Target neutralized. Clean. No cheers, no high fives. Just the Colonel's calm voice again. Good work, Phantom. Good work. 2 words. I didn't smile. I didn't respond beyond protocol. But something settled in my chest. Not pride. Release. Because for the first time, my performance wasn't shadowed by whether she would approve. It stood on its own. Extraction was smooth. Debrief efficient. Back at base, reports were filed. Metrics recorded. Standard procedure. I removed my gloves slowly. My hands didn't shake. In the hallway outside the debrief room, she was waiting. Alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above us. You performed well, she said. Performed well. I almost laughed at the understatement. But this wasn't sarcasm territory. This was territory neither of us had navigated before. Thank you, I replied. There was a pause, longer than comfortable. I underestimated the depth of your classification, she said carefully. Depth. Not ability, not talent. Classification. She was still choosing language that protected her framework. Have you ever watched someone try to adjust without admitting they were wrong? I studied her face. For once, she looked uncertain. You didn't ask, I said quietly. That was the truth. She nodded once. I built my career on being the strongest person in the room, she said. It's difficult to recalibrate when the room changes. There it was. Not apology. Acknowledgement. And that mattered more. I didn't need you to step aside, I said. I just needed you not to push me down. The words surprised even me. Calm. Clear. Not accusatory. She held my gaze. I never saw you as weak, she said. Then why did you treat me like I was? I asked. Silence. Real silence. For a moment, she looked less like a general and more like a mother who had spent decades equating strength with dominance. I thought pressure would make you sharper, she said. It did, I replied, but not the way you intended. Have you ever realized that sometimes the person who shapes you most is also the one you have to outgrow? She exhaled slowly. You've built something separate from me, she said. Yes. And I can't control it. No. Another pause. And in that pause, I understood something important. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating her the way she had humiliated me. It was about separation. Emotional distance that had been forming for years finally solidified. I don't need your approval anymore, I said quietly. I need your respect. Her jaw tightened slightly. You have it, she said. Simple, direct. For the first time in my life, she didn't attach conditions to it, and that was the real shift. Because once respect enters a relationship, hierarchy loses some of its grip. As she walked away, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. This mission had changed more than operational status. It had reset the axis between us. And once that axis shifts, the future doesn't look the same. The recognition came quietly. No ceremony. No public correction of what she had said in that operations room. But the change was there. At the next briefing when I entered, she didn't speak over me. She didn't redirect the conversation when my assessment differed from hers. She listened. Listening was new. Have you ever noticed how respect isn't loud? It shows up in small adjustments. She began introducing me by my call sign in operational settings, not as her daughter, not as a junior officer, just Phantom-11. It was subtle, but it mattered. Still, something inside me had already crossed a boundary, because even though she had shifted, the years before hadn't disappeared. You don't erase dismissal with a single mission. You recalibrate around it. One evening after training, she approached me again. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the yard. "You've become someone I didn't anticipate," she said. That was the closest she would ever come to admitting surprise. "I didn't build myself to surprise you," I replied. "I built myself to stand without you." She studied me for a moment, then nodded, and I realized something. The fear I carried for years, the need to avoid embarrassing her, was gone. In its place was something steadier, self-definition. I no longer needed her room to validate my presence in it. And that boundary? It couldn't be crossed again. The base returned to routine. Morning drills, equipment checks, quiet meals in the mess hall where conversations stayed measured and controlled. On the surface, nothing dramatic had changed. But inside me, something had. For years, I had moved through spaces calculating how my actions reflected on her. And every decision filtered through one question. Will this embarrass her? That question was gone. Have you ever realized how much mental space fear takes up once it leaves? I trained differently after that mission. Not harder, just freer. My shoulders didn't carry invisible weight. My breath came steadier at the range. My focus sharpened because it wasn't divided between performance and perception. My mother still outranked me. She still held authority in rooms I entered. But the emotional hierarchy had dissolved. One afternoon during a strategy review, she asked for my assessment before offering her own. It was a small procedural choice. Yet the room noticed. So did I. Respect wasn't being handed to me out of obligation. It had recalibrated itself. Later that week, she stopped by my office. No agenda, no operational notes. "I spent years believing strength meant control," she said. "You proved it can also mean restraint." That was as close to vulnerability as she would ever allow herself. "I learned restraint from you," I replied. "I just used it differently." We stood in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing beneath her shadow. I was standing beside it. And that difference changes how you walk forward. Time didn't turn us into something sentimental. It turned us into something balanced. We still disagreed in meetings. We still challenged each other's assessments. But the edge of dismissal was gone. In its place was something steadier. Acknowledgement. Months later, during another high-level briefing, a young officer stood up to volunteer for a complex assignment. His voice was controlled, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Before anyone could question him, my mother spoke. "Let him finish." The room quieted. She listened. Fully. I recognized that moment instantly. Years ago, she would have interrupted me the same way she once told me to sit down. Now she allowed space. Have you ever seen someone change without announcing it? That was her version of growth. After the meeting, she walked beside me down the corridor. Sunlight cut through the high windows, tracing sharp lines across the floor. "You don't hesitate anymore," she said. "I don't need to," I replied. She nodded once, satisfied. There was no apology ceremony, no dramatic reconciliation, just mutual understanding earned the hard way. I realized something then. I had spent years trying to become someone she couldn't dismiss. What I didn't understand was that I also became someone she had to respect. Not because I was her daughter, but because I was undeniable. And that shift wasn't about rank. It was about identity. This wasn't revenge, it was recalibration. And sometimes the strongest position isn't above someone. It's equal. What would you have done in my place? Comment below.